Hey, students, this is Professor Gore. I wanted to finish the part one of this recorded lecture, and my apologies about the video. For some reason, I wasn't logged into Screencastify, and it was going to cut off my video short um, because it claimed I didn't have, I had limited storage. I actually have unlimited storage with the upgrade that I purchased. So anyway, let's get back to talking about Hawaii and so forth. So basically, Hawaiian sugar came in the United States with no tariffs from 1875 until 1890. So about 15 years, American sugar growers on Hawaiian Islands had enjoyed basically their sugar being imported with no taxes. Then 1890, the McKinley Tariff helped funded and passed by future President William McKinley. It made it where Hawaiian sugar now had a tariff. And so now these sugar planters decided that this was hurting their business. And so they thought, well, what if we seize control of Hawaii? Then maybe Hawaii would be annexed like Texas was in 1845. So that's actually what they do. They overthrow Queen Lulukalani. Her brother had passed away, and she had inherited the throne of Hawaii, and sugar planters overthrew her in 1893. And they were hoping to negotiate being annexed. But Benjamin Harris said, his administration said, no, we're not going to do that. Before the Senate could approve it, Grover Cleveland came back into office and stopped it because he thought that it was wrong to do that to Hawaii, which was fairly accurate. But Hawaii is still going to be annexed when William McKinley comes into office in 1898. So this is a political cartoon kind of critical of Hawaii. They make it Hawaiians out to be kind of ignorant, as you can tell from the caricature of Queen Lulukalani and so forth. So you can see where Hawaii is located in the Pacific Ocean. It's tremendous importance because of location. It's not quite halfway to China, but it's close. It's the biggest island network that's close to halfway. The United States is also going to acquire some islands in the South Central Pacific, in the Samoan Islands. We split some of those islands with Britain and France. I'm sorry, Britain and Germany. And eventually we negotiated a treaty to where we say, give me some more of Samoa. And then you can see some of the other islands. Some are inhabited, some are not. Wake Island was one that's going to be in a battle that takes place there during World War II. And then one of the most important battles in American history is going to take place at Midway Island, which was uninhabited during 1942 in American history. In fact, I would argue that if the United States doesn't win at Midway Island, we may not win the war in the Pacific during World War II. So I'll cover that when we get to the World War II lecture. But Battle of Midway is tremendously important. So here's Queen Lulukalani. Obviously, she looks quite a bit different than she was portrayed in the political cartoon, and it's because the political cartoon was a negative bias towards her. Here is Sanford B. Dole, who was one of the sugar planters who helped overthrow Queen Lulukalani. And he claimed the Republic of Hawaii in 1894 once they're not able to be annexed by the United States in 1893. And so eventually, though, it will get annexed in 1898 when William McKinley is president. Grover Cleveland puts a stop to it. And so this right here on the bottom right is a political cartoon looking at Uncle Sam playing chess with some other world powers and so forth. And this is the Hawaii annexation ceremony in 1898 on the top left. So let's look at other American expansion at this time. So in 1867, well before anything came into effect about Hawaii getting duty-free in 1875, Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of State, William Seward, who actually one of the people involved with John Wilkes Booth tried to kill William Seward when he was recovering from a carriage accident. They stabbed him a bunch of times. They actually, he survived. And thankfully, because in 1867, he purchased Alaska from Russia for a whopping $7.5 million. Now, you may be thinking, wow, you know, it's Alaska, it's cold a lot, but Alaska is going to have great natural resources that's going to be discovered there later in American history. It's going to have a great fishing industry. Gold rush is going to happen. And then, of course, most recently, petroleum is a big part of the Alaskan economy. So I have a good friend of mine who I taught with who was from the Anchorage area. And so Midway Islands, I've covered that. Those are uninhabited islands we buy as a repair and a fueling station halfway between or close to halfway between the U.S. and China. And so anyway, we'll talk about the Philippines in a later lecture. A lot of people called it was Seward's mistake, thinking, why in the world would we buy Alaska? Well, $7.5 million for what Alaska has brought to the U.S. economy, I'd say that was a heck of a deal. Look at this one. They're saying that Seward's icebox and that it was a big iceberg and so forth. And this is Seward with Andrew Johnson, political cartoon kind of making fun of them. So these are the dates of different islands and so forth the United States acquires that you can look at. So I've already talked about the Samoan Islands. We split them with Britain and Germany. And then, but one of the things that we've covered in Module 1 of this course is how much economically the United States booms in the second half of the 1800s with the second phase industrial revolution. So our gross domestic product quadrupled between 1870 and 1900. That's incredible. 30 years growth, you quadruple your capacity. That is nuts. So a lot of expansionists at this time argued that if the United States doesn't expand to new territories and new markets, we're going to explode. Okay, so we need new potential consumers for our products. The other group that are anti-expansionists or anti-imperialists are going to argue that no, we don't need to do that. So the country is going to be pretty divided, especially at the end of the Spanish-American War, about 50-50, whether the United States should be expansionistic or not. So just like for those who have me for U.S. History 1, and we looked at Module 1 in the colonial time period, one of the goals of an empire is you always want to export more than you import, and so that was the goal with expanding as well. And so the argument is that the Americans need foreign buyers. So 80% of our exports went to Europe and Canada primarily at this time. Now you look at today, Mexico is one of our most important trading partners as well as China. Canada still is. Nothing's changed about that. So China had become very important to really the world economy. For those that have had me for world history, man, China is one of the most important economic places of world history, and one of the main reasons why Europeans wanted to get to the Indian Ocean trade is they wanted to trade with places like India and China. And so, but China is at its weakest point in world history, and they are going to be kind of pushed around by Europeans and the Japanese in the late 10s, early 1900s. That's going to change after World War II when China becomes communist. And they become, by the end of the 20th century, an economic juggernaut once again. Now, for world history, we cover imperialism and the Berlin Conference a lot more in detail, but basically, to give you a Cliff Notes version, the Berlin Conference was where Germany, which had just united in the 1870s, they were kind of late in the game in Europe, European expansion and imperialism. They united to found the country we now know as Germany, and they wanted to potentially get some colonies in Africa. And so what they did is they invited European countries to come to Berlin to figure out how they're going to peacefully carve up Africa. Mind you, no African nation was invited to this conference, and they were basically just going to carve up Africa whether they liked it or not. Not exactly a shining moment in world history by any means. But China and Africa are going to be very important for the global economy. Africa especially for the amount of natural resources that are there, and eventually building railroads in Africa. So let me explain what imperialism actually is. It's where a stronger nation dominates a weaker nation. They either control it directly, or they have what's called indirect imperialism. Okay, so direct imperialism would they would come in and their officials, say like Britain, British officials would come in and be in control of the government. Indirect imperialism is where you let locals who have been in power previously to stay in power or put in new locals, and then they do whatever you tell them to do. So you're not directly controlling them, but you're controlling them. Okay, so kind of like a puppet, so forth. So you have economic imperialism, and one of the reasons for economic imperialism is you need new natural resources for industrial growth. Commerce, you need new buyers for your manufactured products. Nationalism is you want to create a powerful country. Military is you want military bases around the world to maintain your military dominance. And then humanitarian is they want to spread what they call civilization to other countries, and also places like Britain were sending out Christian missionaries to evangelize. Evangelize means you try to convert somebody to your religion. So why U.S. imperialism? Okay, so we're not Europe. Why would the United States get imperialistic at this time? It's really summed up as the three Ds: duty, dollars, destiny. So the duty aspect is that we want to introduce democracy, okay, which is a good form of government, along with Christianity to other countries, okay. Because remember, at this time you have the Third Great Awakening that's taking place. Dollars is you need new resources and new markets for your goods, just like the Europeans. And then destiny, it's now instead of manifest destiny to expand from coast to coast, now it's manifest destiny to expand to other parts of the globe. And this political cartoon is Russia, Britain, and Germany playing grab bag with Africa and so forth. So by 1900, you can see from this map and the different colors what part of the globe that these European countries, as well as Japan, have seized. Okay, so one of the things that happens is China is going to be kind of divided up into what's called spheres of influence. Let me explain what that is. Spheres of influence is where you're not really controlling the country government-wise in a region of China, but what you are is, let's say Germany is claiming a sphere of influence over south part of China. Well, that makes it where the Chinese that live in the south part of China can only trade with Germany. They can't trade with Russia or Britain or Japan or anybody else. Russia does this in Manchuria with their railroads. Britain does it around the Hong Kong region. And you see France and Japan try this as well, along with Germany. And so the United States is going to come in and say, hey, why don't we have free trade here? This is ridiculous. Okay. So it's basically trying to create an economic monopoly with what European country can the Chinese people trade with, or Japanese as well. So not all of China gets carved up, but the most important parts in the Europeans' eyes gets carved up. You can see from the diagonal stripe lines. Now, this right here seemed like an insignificant book, but actually had tremendous impact in American history. It's written by a famous naval admiral named Alfred Thayer Mahan, and he wrote this book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And in that, his premise is that basically navies, and particularly good navies and big navies, have really led to countries becoming dominant and powerful empires in world history. You look at China, they had a powerful navy under the Ming Dynasty. You look at Britain. One of the reasons why Britain survived throughout European conflicts is they had the best navy in Europe at one point in history. The Romans had a powerful navy and so forth. The Ottoman Empire had a powerful navy at one point. And so that's what he's arguing, is that the key to success is having a powerful navy. You got to remember, Mahan was an admiral in the United States Navy. Here is old ATM. And so when a lot of people read that book, they're like, well, we need to build a powerful navy to have a stronger country. Now, in Venezuela, there was a crisis there. For years, a border dispute had simmered basically between Venezuela and British Guiana. So British Guiana was controlled by Britain, and it was basically being about gold. Gold was discovered along the border. Britain claims that the border was the gold was more on their land, while Venezuela's like, no, it's further. The border is further east than what you think, and it's on our land. And so basically, there was threats that Britain would invade, intervene, and so the U.S. began waving the Monroe Doctrine and got them to arbitrate. Arbitrate means that you agree to like a third party whose objective coming in and helping you work out a settlement. Companies will agree to arbitration. Professional sports stars, athletes will agree to arbitration if they feel like their contract is not fair. Okay. Now, this political cartoon is more critical of Teddy Roosevelt and expansion. And so there was a famous book that was from, a poem from a British writer by the name of Rudyard Kipling. And it was called The White Man's Burden. And the argument was that it was basically Western Europe, I guess you could say maybe the US and Canada as well, but really he was arguing for Western Europe. Their job is to civilize the world. Now, this one is Teddy Roosevelt carrying a tribal person all the way up to the schoolhouse, and you notice that in the hillside there's two boots sticking out of the ground from being buried, and so forth. And so basically the argument is that the Americans should civilize the rest of the world. And Teddy Roosevelt did favor the United States having more of a police action role. He wasn't as imperialistic, certainly, as the Europeans were. In fact, different times he's actually asked to kind of help arbitrate some disputes. Now, social Darwinism, which we covered in Module 1, talked about survival of the fittest supply to society. But some people use social Darwinism to even talk about empires. So like Britain, France, Germany, Russia being dominant is because they were survival of the fittest and they were more fit to advance and create empires in the world. And so also it was commonly thought that certain races were superior to others. Now, the majority of Americans did not favor social Darwinism, but what you do have is social Darwinism, particularly was advocated in science and some of the philosophies in Europe, and it spread to the United States. There's some are going to advocate that the United States should expand because of that their United States, the Caucasian race is more advanced, evolutionary than other parts of the world. Now, World War II and the Nazis are going to kind of shred this. But you did have this thought, and Germany did not invent it, but they definitely took it to a much further conclusion. So Manifest Destiny became redefined to expand to new markets across the globe. And we covered Frederick Jackson Turner's frontier thesis at in Module 1, but some people are going to use this frontier thesis to argue that the United States needs a new frontier. So the Monroe Doctrine hadn't really been used. It was passed in the 1820s. Written by John Quincy Adams, but delivered by President James Monroe. And it argued that Europeans should stay in the Western Hemisphere and not get involved, or sorry, stay in the Eastern Hemisphere and not get involved in the Western Hemisphere. And the United States said, hey, we're going to stay out of Eastern Hemisphere issues. It gets passed. It's really aimed at Russia in the 1820s. It's pretty much ignored. And then all of a sudden in the late 1800s, it starts being used. And particularly the person who used it, especially in the early 1900s, is Teddy Roosevelt. So here's our argument for expansion. Okay, you got to keep up with European nations, otherwise you're going to get left in the dust. Desire for American nationalism and prestige. Also social Darwinism, this theory of racial superiority, and provide markets for surplus goods and investments. Against it was that the United States has got plenty of resources and buyers that are, then it doesn't need that. And that the idea that Americans should not rule over other peoples. Okay, here's some famous imperialists and anti-imperialists. This is probably one of my favorite political cartoons of all time. It is where William McKinley, who later becomes president in 1896 until his death from assassination in 1901. This is Uncle Sam, and it's showing his britches are getting pretty big from territory expansion. It's got Puerto Rico on there, Guam, Texas, Louisiana Purchase, Alaska, Florida, California, and elsewhere. And then the anti-imperialists, who look a little crazy, are trying to feed him an elixir. Okay, so this is actually in favor of expansion. Here's some arguments if you want to read them, but for time's sake, we're not going to read them. These are great primary sources to help you understand. Josiah Strong was actually a Christian missionary who's arguing for expansion. And one of the reasons is he wants to expand Christianity to other parts of the globe. Here's Josiah Strong. Here's American missionaries in China. In fact, a lot of American missionaries went to China, including a lot of British missionaries. Later in the Boxer Rebellion, some of the missionaries are going to get slaughtered, men, women, and children. And this political cartoon is kind of making fun of this picture, saying that these Uncle Sam and these industrialists are hurting the backs of the Chinese. And we'll stop there and we'll come back to part 2, even though that's kind of part 3 because my other part got messed up.